Hello friends, imagine this. A country so poor that barely 40 years ago, over 90% of its people lived in poverty. A nation filled with hunger, struggle, and hopelessness. And now, that same country stands as one of the most powerful economies on Earth. Today, it contributes more than 18% to the world's GDP, while its poverty rate has fallen below 1%. That country is China, and its story is one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. But how did this miracle happen? What was the secret behind China's rise from desperation to dominance? Let's dive deep into this unbelievable case study of how China became a global superpower. To understand China's journey, we need to go back thousands of years. The word China actually comes from the ancient Qin dynasty, spelled Qin but pronounced Qin. It was this dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, that unified the vast Chinese lands under one empire. That's also why in Hindi, we call the Chinese people Chinny. Even white sugar, or Chinny, got its name because refined sugar was believed to have first come to India through a Chinese merchant. Interestingly, the Chinese don't call their country China, they call it Zhongguo, meaning Middle Kingdom, a name that reflects their ancient belief that China was the center of the world. Geographically, China is the fourth largest country on Earth, sharing a border with India. But most of its population lives far away from India, along the fertile eastern coast, because the western part is covered with mountains and deserts. For centuries, China was one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations. But by the 19th century, things took a dark turn. This was the beginning of what the Chinese call the century of humiliation. It started in 1839 when the British East India Company began exporting opium to China. The drug destroyed lives, devastated families, and wrecked Chinese society. When China tried to stop the opium trade, the British attacked, leading to the Opium Wars. After losing, China was forced to sign unfair treaties and hand over ports and territories to foreign powers. Soon after came internal chaos, civil wars like the Taiping Rebellion, which killed millions. Then in 1894, China fought Japan in the First Sino-Japanese War and lost more territory. From 1937 to 1945, Japan invaded China again, this time brutally, killing around 30 million Chinese during World War II, and when the war finally ended, another civil war broke out between two Chinese factions, the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party, also known as the KMT. By 1949, the Communists, led by Mao Zadong, had won. The defeated nationalists fled to Taiwan, and on October 1, 1949, the People's Republic of China was born. Mao Zedong was celebrated as the revolutionary hero who had freed China from foreign control. But his rule soon became a tragedy for his own people. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, a campaign to rapidly industrialize the country and increase food production. Land was taken from landlords and collectivized. Farmers no longer owned what they grew. People were told to build small furnaces in their backyards to produce steel, and massive state-led projects were pushed forward without proper planning. The result was catastrophic. Crops failed, steel production was poor, and mismanagement combined with bad weather led to the Great Chinese Famine. Between 20 to 40 million people died. It remains one of the deadliest human-made disasters in history. Mao's next big move was the Cultural Revolution in 1966, an attempt to consolidate his power after criticism. He mobilized millions of young people, calling them the Red Guards. These students carried his little red book, spread propaganda, and targeted anyone seen as disloyal, intellectuals, officials, even family members. Schools shut down, people were publicly humiliated, tortured, or killed. Historical monuments were destroyed. China descended into chaos. By the time the Cultural Revolution ended in the early 1970s, the nation had lost not only millions of lives, but also years of progress. Mao died in 1976, leaving behind a broken economy, a traumatized population, and a country far from the great power it once dreamed of being. But even during Mao's rule, not everything was lost. His government had promoted literacy, gender equality, and education. Women gained the right to divorce, forced marriages were banned, and literacy rates improved significantly. These reforms laid the foundation for what was about to come next, the biggest economic transformation the world had ever seen. After Mao's death, a new leader rose, Deng Xiaoping. Often called the father of modern China, Deng brought with him a completely different mindset. He believed that China's extreme government control was the reason for its poverty. He famously said, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." In other words, he believed in results, not ideology. This philosophy became known as socialism with Chinese characteristics. Deng introduced economic liberalization, allowing China to mix communism with elements of capitalism. He started with agriculture. Instead of forcing farmers into collective farms, he allowed families to lease land and make their own decisions about what to grow and how to sell it. They still had to sell a portion to the government, but they could keep and profit from the surplus. This one change revolutionized rural China. Farmers became more productive and innovative, and soon food shortages vanished. Between 1978 and 1984, agricultural output grew by an average of over 7% each year, and grain production doubled. Next, Deng applied similar reforms to factories. Before him, every factory was controlled by the Communist Party, and workers had no power or incentive. Under Deng's factory manager responsibility system, workers and managers gained control over production, pricing, and wages. They worked harder because now their success was directly tied to their profits. The country began to hum with new energy. By the mid-1980s, Deng turned his attention to education. He passed a law making 9 years of education free and compulsory. The government started pouring money into schools, technical training, and universities. From just 2% of GDP in 1980, China's spending on education rose to over 4% by 2010. Literacy rates soared from 65% in 1980 to over 95% by 2012. China also invested heavily in healthcare and technical skills, creating a workforce that was not just cheap but highly skilled. This was the real fuel behind China's industrial boom. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe right now, because stories like these remind us how vision, patience, and leadership can change the destiny of a nation. Don't miss the next one. Deng Xiaoping's next masterstroke was the creation of Township and Village Enterprises, or TVS. These were small, locally managed businesses that helped rural people find work beyond farming. They produced everything from textiles to electronics, and some of them grew into global giants. Huawei, for instance, started as a small TVE in Shenzhen before becoming one of the world's biggest telecom companies. By the early 1990s, TVS employed over 100 million people and contributed nearly a fifth of China's industrial output. They reduced poverty and bridged the income gap between rural and urban regions. Then came the Special Economic Zones, or SEZ, where China truly opened its doors to the world. In these zones, foreign companies were invited to invest, with low taxes and simplified regulations. The first SEZ was established in Shenzhen, which at the time was just a small fishing village. Within a few decades, Shenzhen's GDP exploded from a mere $0.3 billion in 1980 to more than $400 billion by 2020. It became a symbol of modern China: high-rise towers, global corporations, and unstoppable ambition. Companies like Apple, Nike, and Volkswagen rushed to build factories in China, drawn by skilled labor, efficiency, and low costs. China's foreign investment grew from just $60 million in 1980 to more than $333 billion by 2021. The government also invested massively in infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, and power. Research and innovation became a national priority. Science parks like Zhongwencun in Beijing turned into hubs for technology and research. The government trained hundreds of thousands of scientists and engineers, investing over $500 billion annually in research and development by 2020. Slowly but surely, China became the manufacturing hub of the world, the place where nearly everything was made. The results were astonishing. In 1990, India's per capita GDP was slightly higher than China's, but within 30 years, China's per capita income became more than 3 times greater. From a country that once begged for aid, China became a nation that lends money to others, builds infrastructure in foreign lands, and competes directly with the world's most powerful economies. Deng Xiaoping once described his approach as crossing the river by feeling the stones, taking cautious, thoughtful steps, learning from each move, and adjusting policies along the way. He wasn't driven by ego or blind ideology, but by practicality and experimentation. That patience and pragmatism became the DNA of China's rise. But China's journey isn't a perfect fairy tale. While Deng brought economic freedom, he kept tight control politically. In 1989, the Tiananmen Square protests ended in a brutal crackdown, a reminder that political dissent still had no space. The same authoritarian structure remains today under Xi Jinping, with increasing control over personal freedoms and censorship. And the rapid industrial growth came at an enormous environmental cost: pollution, deforestation, and ecological imbalance. Still, when we look at the big picture, China's rise remains one of the greatest turnarounds in history, from a famine-stricken nation to a modern superpower in just 4 decades. It teaches us that change is possible, but it demands vision, discipline, and the courage to reform step by step. So, what do you think? Was China's rise a miracle or a masterclass in long-term planning? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what lessons you think India or any other country could learn from China's journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.